everybody, and welcome to today's virtual panel event from Bright. I'm very excited to be joined by a couple of excellent expert speakers, and today we're going to be talking about growing audiences and driving engagement in B2B publishing, media and events. So as you're all aware, I'm sure there is a lot to do in that industry, constantly thinking about how you can develop your audience, juggling events, thinking about content and editorial, how do you drive subscriptions, and how do you keep building those communities to grow those audiences and ultimately be able to sell more to your commercial partners and clients. So today we really wanted to deep dive into what's actually driving results and not just making more noise. So in this panel, we have brought together some senior experts, as I've said, and they've both been in the thick of it. And they're going to bring some real world insights into what's working and really share some of their experiences around audience development and engagement. So before I introduce them very briefly, I'm Zoe, the Managing Director at Bright. We are a B2B agile marketing consultancy, and we focus on helping our clients to improve their effectiveness of their marketing, the efficiency, and also their audience engagement. We work with a number of large publishing, media and events companies and help them with their marketing strategies. So I'd like to hand over first of all to Dasha Dollar-Smirnov, who's a communications expert, so she can introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Dasha, and I have a real passion for storytelling. That passion started out right at the beginning of my career, where I actually started out in the performing arts as an actress. However, I got seduced into a career in advertising. Not sure how still yet, but I had a really great career working on multiple brands, bringing in my passion for storytelling into helping those brands engage audiences across multiple channels. And actually it was really great timing for my career, because I really a lot of new channels started coming through just as I was going up the ladder in the world of advertising. However, eventually my call of theatre called me back, and I've combined my experience in advertising with my experience in storytelling and performing arts. And now I have my own company called Frog Talk, and we're a coaching and training company that coaches in communication and public speaking and presentations. And I'll hand over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Dasha. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm the head of brand, content and community marketing at Informer Markets. I work across our pharma portfolio of events. I got my start in marketing around about 10 years ago now. I joined a very small startup, and the timing was great because they were just exploring this thing called content marketing, and it really clicked for me. And then since then, I have been working for Informer Markets for around 7 years now. Have worked across different teams, different portfolios of events in different roles, but my main focus has always been looking at how we can use content marketing and sort of that year-round engagement and storytelling to really enhance our events, to grow our audiences, and look at how we can use that to also improve our data and ultimately drive revenue and decision making across our audiences.
Amazing. Thank you both. I'm really glad that you could both be here today. So let's kick off. It would be useful just to get a quick take from you both on what your definition of audience development is. Maybe Chelsea, we can start with you and give us a bit of a rundown of what that means for you and how you see it in action at Informer Markets.
Yes, so I think for me it's all around kind of not just growing but really understanding your audience as well. I think we can very easily get caught up in kind of big numbers or just having to grow. But it's really making sure that that growth is aligned with your overall business goals and your overall strategic goals. So you're growing, but you're growing in the right direction with the right audiences, and that you really understand what is resonating with them and can use those insights to develop your marketing, to develop how you talk to them, and really improve that effectiveness. So I think that's really key. So you're kind of growing, but you're also able to think about those sort of journeys for your audience and who they are and what their next steps would be.
Yeah, that sounds great, and obviously aligns very well with what you've been doing as a business. And then Dasha, perhaps your kind of understanding from the comms and the storytelling point of view would be interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Chelsea said. It's about seeing your audience as people, something beyond numbers. And, people, your audience is engaged. People are engaged when they start to have a two-way conversation with you. So it's really about growing an audience that starts to engage with you in a meaningful way and give you kind of back feedback, communication, those valuable insights. And I think ultimately it's, when your audience then starts to amplify your message and, unprompted start to communicate it out to other people, that's when, you've really kind of created a loyal and engaged audience.
Yeah, thank you. It would be good to understand a little bit more as well about some of those challenges that you might face when you're thinking about audience development, particularly that, as you mentioned, Chelsea, growth being important and driving engagement. Have you got any examples you could share, particularly thinking about how you've integrated events, content, and digital products to drive that engagement?
Yeah, I think honestly, one of the biggest challenges is just cutting through the noise when you're trying to reach those new audiences. There's so much going on out there. I think the way that people interact with brands and with companies is changing all the time. In events, in one way, we're slightly lucky in that I think that face-to-face engagement is always sort of the core of what we do and what we're looking at. But beyond that, I think it's constantly evolving and changing. And maybe one of the sort of challenges that we have based off of the back of that is we have lots of different channels, lots of different ways to interact with our audiences. And actually, how do we understand what is happening when you have those multiple channels, multiple steps involved? I think we've had a few examples that come to mind where at sort of a first glance, it looks like a campaign is performing really, really well. We've looked at things like the sort of views and like the CPA, and it looks like everything is going great. But actually, we've sort of dug under the surface beyond sort of the initial promotional campaigns, and we found that actually there's maybe, if it's around a piece of content, there's a really high bounce rate or really low time on page. So we've sort of had to really dig into that to understand that although one channel might be performing well, it's not reaching that end goal of what you kind of want that piece of marketing or content to do. So it's really about being able to take that step back and look at that full view of what's happening and that end goal. And identifying maybe if there's a disconnect between what people are seeing and experiencing, and just really like understanding what that data tells you. We have a lot of data sources across a lot of different places, so it can be a challenge to just kind of wrangle it all together.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think very interesting, and often people find it difficult to kind of understand their audience growth across the whole piece. That attribution can be tough, and we see as well, like sometimes there's an over reliance on like the vanity metrics, which, as you say, they only tell you one dimension of the whole story. And when we talk about vanity metrics, we're really thinking, like you say, about those kind of single performance points in the data, when what you need to do is to try and drill into that and understand it a bit more in the round. Dasha, I guess it would be interesting to understand from you really around audience development, and just what role do you think storytelling plays in creating those seamless experiences across the different channels?
I think it's important to think of how your story or your narrative plays out across the different channels. And so it's an adaptable story, and it's almost like thinking of your different channels as kind of an ecosystem or elements of a story that kind of builds up a singular experience for your audience. So there's a certain consistency. So, like Chelsea was saying, you might have an entry point for somebody, either where it's either from through one of your social channels, or it's through a web page, and they come in, but then they drop off from that point. And so what do you need to kind of do from a storytelling perspective, sort of breadcrumb your audience to want to engage across the other channels? So almost to create that kind of holistic experience. So really starting to think about it kind of less as singular channels, but more of like an ecosystem where your audience will be moving around and kind of experiencing other different elements of your brand, of your story, ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And also thinking about how you connect the different types of products you have or services in your portfolio, so whether that's events, content editorial, digital products, effectively, in order to join up those breadcrumbs and allow the audience to explore those different propositions. I mean, Chelsea, just going back to your point about cutting through the noise, with so much content out there, are there some practical ways that marketers can ensure their messaging stands out and builds that longer term engagement?
Yeah, I think there are probably a couple of areas that I would say to really focus on. And I think one is really leaning into the human element of the brand. Like Dasha says, really thinking about that story that you tell. I don't know, I imagine it's the same for everyone, but if I looked at my LinkedIn feed right now, every other post is about how to spot AI content, and that it is all the same, and that there are all these tips that will like tip you off if someone's using AI. And I think whether or not that is true, or whether you agree with that, I think it's really eroded some of the trust that people have, especially on social media, around the content that's posted or like the way they interact with brands. And so I think what we see is quite often our higher performing social content, especially, is around more of those human elements. We have kind of behind the scenes of the setup of an event, or we have some of our team members talking about recently, for example, what International Women's Day means to them. And we find that that does seem to resonate more. I think people like being able to put a face to the brand. And then the second part of that, I would say, is just really, really understand and know your data. I think your data will tell you what is standing out and what is cutting through that noise. And once you know it really well, you can start to look at the patterns of what's working, and really begin to build on that. So you're not kind of blindly guessing. You're really being able to build on what you know works already. So kind of that like human and data side coming together, I think puts you in a really strong position to start to hopefully cut through some of that noise and really connect with your audiences.
Yeah, I think there's some very good points in there, and I'm sure we're going to come back and talk about AI as we move through this discussion. It's certainly on kind of everyone's minds how they can adopt and make the most of those tools. Just going back to those stories that you talked about, Dasha, and like crafting stories that genuinely resonate with B2B audiences. Are there any common mistakes you see marketers making when they're trying to engage with their communities?
Yeah, and this is a common mistake that all marketers make across all industries. And I hate to break it to you, but nobody cares about your brand or your company or your product. Audiences care about their problems. And it's, you have to start there. Kind of what are the problems and challenges your audience have? What are their interests? And then you build out your narrative from there. And that's how you then bring in kind of stories around kind of existing customers, existing solutions that you have, and weave it into that. Because I mean, like Chelsea said, that we're all kind of cutting through the noise is really difficult. We're surrounded by so much content, which has now been amplified and multiplied astronomically by AI, and it's only going to get noisier out there. So kind of really going back and connecting with your audience in a way that shows that you care about them, and you actually want to talk about what their problem is or what their challenge is or what their interest is, rather than talk about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and actually, something that's very core to the work we do at Bright, customer centricity, which really does mean putting yourself in their shoes and using customer insight in order to shape value propositions, messages that really resonates around what their pains are that they're experiencing, the types of things they're looking to achieve in their personal and professional life, and really leveraging those in how you go to market. As you say, you have to start there to get that early engagement, and then hopefully you'll build that trust and be able to develop the relationship further. So that leads us on to the next topic, which is really what is working well. And we've covered some of the what doesn't work well. I'm sure there's more to talk about there, but Chelsea, can you share examples of audience engagement tactic or campaign that maybe didn't work as expected, and what lessons you took from it?
Yeah, I think kind of building on what I touched on earlier, I think we've had thinking particularly around how we've tried to use sort of gated content in the past to grow our audiences. We've found that we've kind of had a bit of a disconnect between maybe the promotional campaign and sort of what the people were then landing on and looking at and engaging with. So we're seeing some really good engagement with the ads, for example, that we were running, that people would come to the landing page, they weren't spending time on there, they weren't converting. And the main goal of this was kind of that it was a data conversion piece of content. So although from an awareness side, we were doing quite well, it was performing well, the end goal of that content to convert people into sort of known audiences to then nurture just wasn't really working. And I think what it really highlighted was that actually being able to look at that full picture is really crucial, but it also highlighted a lot around the importance of testing and iterating. So we are working in agile ways. We've brought agile marketing into the teams. And I think it's really helped us identify when there are areas like that aren't working quite early on. And then we're able to test, for example, the creative assets, or we're able to test a different approach on the landing page, or we're able to review maybe the targeting of the campaign, like maybe that wasn't what was working. And that's really, really helped us kind of take that step back and iterate and change and improve early on in the process, rather than sort of letting something roll for a long time and then realizing that it's not actually achieving sort of those end goals that you really wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I do think, obviously, we'll touch on the agile principles a little bit more in a minute, but yeah, they do allow you to flush those things out quickly and to be able to then optimize. Dasha, so you've worked across many brands and not just obviously publishing, media and events, but what trends do you see in audience behavior that the publishing and events marketers need to pay attention to?
I think one of the biggest trends is a real demand for personalization. So it's almost like we're going into a world where audiences are a lot more fragmented, right? There's a lot more niche audiences, and there's a real expectation that, rather than a, catch-all, one message is going to work for everybody. There's a real expectation that it's going to be really unique and tailored in terms of experience. I think the other trend you can see is that there's much more interactive and community-driven engagement, and there's almost an expectation that you're going to get value out of the content, value out of the communication. So the kind of more cold, just information giving or kind of sales focused or value, comms don't really cut through anymore. There's a real kind of, we're all short on time. So we all kind of want to, if we're going to spend time looking at content, we want some value out of it. And then ultimately, our attention spans are becoming really, really, really short, even shorter now, thanks to phones and notifications and all of those wonderful things that have come into our lives in the last 20 years. So I think what works is smaller, more concise, bite-sized pieces of content, rather than something extensive that takes ages to process or digest.
Yeah, I think we're seeing very similar trends across the B2B clients that we work with at Bright, particularly the the importance of having that kind of continual, always on approach from a brand building perspective, combined with more of a demand or performance marketing approach when you've got specific campaigns or events, or push on subscriptions, etc., that you need to incorporate into your marketing mix. So really like blending those two successfully. But I guess one of the outcomes of that is that I think marketers are still struggling somewhat to be able to measure and show the value of those two long and short forms of marketing combined. So really thinking about how they can do that successfully and communicate that as well to their own internal audiences. So whether that would be communicating it to leadership versus working successfully across their teams to optimize what they've got in flight. So yeah, we're certainly seeing that as well, around the need to blend those brand and demand elements successfully. Chelsea, you mentioned agile marketing, and obviously Informa Markets has embraced agile marketing principles, which is fantastic. And it would be good to maybe talk a little bit more how you use that test and learn approach to iterate and drive your marketing strategies without overwhelming your team, without kind of adding kind of more to what they're already doing, but really thinking about how they can focus and be most successful.
Yeah, I think the best way we have found is to really break it down and start small. I think that naturally, as marketers, we're quite curious and we want to test. But I think sometimes, particularly if you're new to agile, it can be slightly overwhelming. You have ways of working, you have ceremonies, you have particular terms and phrases, and there's a lot to take in when you first adopt it. But I think actually the testing mindset is something that is quite almost built in for a lot of marketers. So it's really looking at how we can take what is almost naturally there and just give it a really simple framework. So we have almost tried to break it down and say, okay, kind of start from the end almost. So what are you trying to prove with this test? What is your hypothesis? And it can be as small as, say, I think a different call to action will be more effective, or it could be, I think this brand new kind of social media tactic will work really, really well for engagement. But whatever it is, you've got something you're trying to achieve and prove. And then really refining what sort of one area are you going to focus on for that test. So you're not overwhelming or getting confused when the results come through. And then what I think is really, really key is kind of predefining those metrics that you're going to look at that will prove or disprove what you're testing, and kind of just having it documented. So we have experimented with different formats, different frameworks, but ultimately, as long as we are able to just look back and say something worked or something didn't work, I think that's really key. So I think the most effective way that we found for sharing that is we have sprint reviews that occur at the end of each 4-week sprint that we run in our marketing teams. It's a chance to run through what we've done in those past 4 weeks for other teams and other stakeholders to get that insight into what we've been working on. But that's also a really key time for us to share with other parts of the marketing team, with other different functions across our portfolio, kind of the insights that we're learning from our tests, and to kind of give them that insight into how they can take it on to what they're working on too. So I think as long as you're sort of following those principles, it's mostly about figuring out what's going to work best for your teams. And yeah, starting small is definitely the best way to kind of build up to it.
Yeah, and I think that, it's really important to talk about that reflection, because often marketers are so under pressure, they don't get the time and space to do that effectively, which really helps inform what you do going forward and optimize, avoids lots of rework, and helps you prioritize as well as you move through those ceremonies, as you've mentioned. I think some of the agile principles are very common sense, customer centricity, being data driven. And as you mentioned, really thinking about making sure that you've set KPIs and metrics that you can all then, properly reflect back on and understand what you've learned. If it hasn't necessarily hit some of the targets that you were looking to achieve, then what else have you learned during that cycle, that sprint cycle, that you can then apply going forward to either optimize it or pivot, and make those decisions more easily as a team, and hopefully as well allow you to work, and I know you do this very well at Informa, is allow you to work more cross-functionally as well with people across the business and across the other teams that support some of those activities you're undertaking. So yeah, I think some of that reflection is an obvious one, but often neglected in marketing, and it's so important to have that space. And obviously, the growth mindset and curiosity is a brilliant thing for any business, I think, to develop, and allows you to be more innovative. Hopefully, get things done a little bit more in a focused way that you are aligned to the business goals and priorities.
I think it's also important to remember that there's, test and learn. Learning means there's no, right and wrong answer. So it's creating a culture that, encourages curiosity and risk taking, and that it's a safe environment to take certain risks, or to take, to learn and develop, rather than there's like a right or wrong or successful outcome of this test. It's all about learning from this test and getting insights, rather than just driving for success, which I think quite often marketing departments are under pressure to deliver success. It's like, actually, we're trying to deliver, we're trying to learn, so let's create that safe environment.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that sort of psychological safety piece is very important, actually, and it needs to be role modeled from leadership and encouraged at grassroots, and then it allows that curiosity to flourish. So I think that's a really good point, Dasha. And actually, I think we've all seen situations where marketers, as you say, are being kind of judged on performance without the ability to kind of optimize or make those decisions that they need to in order to improve through learning. So before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to remind everyone that you can, of course, ask questions on the chat. If you've got anything that you'd like to pose to the panel, please do drop it in. We'll also be sharing some reframe cards at the end of the session, which are great. They really help spark ideas. They're really useful with your team. They're a set of very short prompt cards that allow you to have more reflective conversations to help instill that growth mindset and help marketers be more data driven. So we'll be sharing those later on in the session, and obviously you'll be able to download those and use them. Love feedback if you do use them, and on how that's gone for you as well. Oh, we've got a hands up. Joe, I don't know actually if I can unmute you to ask a question, or if you want to pop it in the chat. That might be the easiest way. Let me try. Okay. I think you need to pop it in the chat, so please do that, Joe, and we'd love to hear your question. Or there's a QA as well, so either one, we will get that. So whilst Joe's putting her question in, why don't we talk about AI? I know it's a topic that everyone's talking about in lots of different guises, whether that's Gen AI, agentic AI, how they're adopting it. It's application based. Everyone's got it already emerging in what they're using in their tools, or they're trying to think about what are the tools we might need to adopt in order to be more effective or efficient in what we do. I just wondered, maybe Chelsea, we can start with you. If you've got an example of how you've been testing and adopting AI at Informa and how that's gone for you.
Yeah, I think one of actually my favorite examples is, I would love to take credit for it, but it was actually our kind of customer service function in the business, who kind of took a lot of the survey data that we have, a lot of the feedback that we get. So we, in line with our agile principles and with trying to sort of improve what we do a lot of work with our customers. We survey them, we talk to them at events, we have focus groups, we do interviews. It all brings back a lot of feedback, not just within our collection of events, but across the business, across hundreds of different events in hundreds of different industries. There's a lot of stuff to sift through, especially when you get to like the qualitative stuff rather than just the numbers. So the team used AI to kind of analyze all of that feedback, and really streamline that process of understanding the patterns that come out of that, what common feedback we were getting, what was working well across events, what common like challenges our audience were having. And it just really streamlined that process of pulling out these patterns across this like wealth of information, and to then be able to work on putting actions in place to bring those improvements. And I think that it's something that we're really keen to bring into the marketing sphere as well. We obviously send out a lot of communications, we produce a lot of content, we have a lot of stuff going out there. So really looking at what we are pushing out there, how our different audiences are engaging with it, again, what performs well, and really leveraging it to make those insights faster, to pull all of that together so we can then spend that time implementing them and getting the actions off the back of it and actually bringing that into our marketing to make a difference to our audiences. I think that's a really interesting way that it's been used to help and guide, rather than kind of just creating more stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of where it's really augmenting and supporting the teams rather than, as you say, kind of adding additional work or kind of creating a distraction perhaps that's not as aligned to the goals and targets that you're looking for. So yeah, that's a really good example. And I think the fact that you have obviously an agile marketing approach as well, where you really do have that sort of test and learn mentality and that growth mindset, which allows you to kind of set some experiments where you can bring AI tools in as part of that experiment. We've done similar kind of work with clients around data analysis, but also testing different tools. So the same kind of creative approach or messaging, and using different AI tools to create creative assets, for instance, and then testing those, seeing the different performance that it delivers. So I think, you know, it's great to see people really using them to augment what they're doing and not just to create more content, as you say. Dasha, I don't know if you've got any examples that you'd like to share around where you've seen tools used or people adopting them successfully.
Yeah, I think one of the I completely agree with everything that was said. Where AI becomes really powerful when it comes to storytelling or creative or marketing is the augmentation. So rather than let's generate more stuff, it's how can we personalize stuff, for example. So something like Adobe Sensei, which allows you to personalize content on your website based on your audience, becomes really, really powerful. But you still need the kind of the human brain behind that to create those stories. But using a tool that can allow you to then show that story in a different way depending on who's looking at your content, who's looking at your website, can be really, really powerful. And then from there you can then start to learn based on what the data inputs are, and then start optimizing that creative. And being able to do that in real time is really powerful, and something that we couldn't do, say, 10 years ago without AI now here.
Yeah, I think, we're in an era where there's going to be further disruption from AI, and it's great, like for marketers, in terms of if you embrace it positively. I think there's going to be so much benefit for, like you say, creativity, like fine tuning and making sure you really are engaging your audiences. And the AI, agentic AI in particular, I think will help us to be better at personalization, better at understanding insight, and how we can better improve our communications and creatives for the audiences. So yeah, it's definitely an exciting area, and one that our clients are certainly embracing. At the moment tends to be more of a narrow adoption around Gen AI within applications that they're already using, with a few new tools. But I think the agentic AI, that we're starting to see that becoming more of an area they want to test over this coming 6 months. So yeah, we will be sharing more on that as well as we get into it. So Dasha, actually, I have a question for you, really, which goes back to Chelsea's point about kind of workload management and using experiments to prioritize as well. But it's like, do you have any advice you could give to publishers and event organizers looking to build a culture of experimentation without burning out their teams?
So starting small is great. Choose, and I'm going to use a phrase I hate, but I hear a lot. Start with the low-hanging fruit. I'm sorry, it's a cheesy corporate, but it's true. Start small and start simple, right? So you're not setting people up for failure, because I think that's kind of a really important part. So that people kind of, as they adopt a new way of working, as they adopt to kind of a new culture, you need to make sure that they feel supported, and we're taking small steps. Creating that psychological safety, but also, give them the right tools, give them the right skills. It's important to see, what training they might need, what extra training and resources they might need. And it doesn't have to be a huge investment, right? There's so many courses out there, online courses, self-learning courses, workshops, day workshops. So give your team that kind of extra bit of support that they might need to kind of boost their skills. It doesn't have to be huge, but it can give them that kind of extra confidence they would need to then go out and start implementing these new these new approaches, these new strategies. And with their first kind of projects, the small and simple ones, what you'll find, kind of their confidence will grow, and you'll be able to start seeing bigger and bigger results and kind of bigger insights and bigger learnings from it.
Yeah, I think that's a key theme from this discussion today, is that kind of starting small and establishing best practice and key principles so that the teams feel supported. And certainly, when we introduce agile ways of working, which is such a often a nascent or new thing for many marketing teams, then really helping and supporting their adoption and allowing them to kind of explore how they need to customize some of those agile ways of working to work well in their own environments. I mean, if you're in a corporate environment, it's not every team you work with will be agile. So how do how you manage that and make sure that you're able to adapt and as I say, customize that approach so it can be successful is really important. So I guess going back to the audiences again and engaged communities in particular, so many B2B publishers have struggled to convert one-time attendees or readers into loyal community members. Chelsea, is there something that's worked for Informa in terms of building a deeper audience relationship?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas that have worked really, really nicely. And I think one comes back very much to that customer centricity. So I think we do have a lot of focus in speaking to our audiences directly, particularly at the events that we run, but also through things like surveys, as mentioned previously. I think that as much information as we can get out of sort of the data and the analytics, there's nothing that really replaces that direct feedback. and understanding then what it is that our audiences need from us that we can act on and bring in, whether that's to our events, whether that's how they like to be communicated with, whether that's around sort of the content and insights that they're looking for in the future. I think that direct feedback and getting that on quite a consistent basis makes a huge difference in understanding what it is that's going to motivate them to have that loyalty and to keep coming back to you. And then equally, I think going back almost to that agile marketing, I think as event marketers, we often fall into a pattern of looking quite cyclically at our marketing. We'll sort of have a run up to an event, the event will happen, and then we're jumping in for the next event. And it can be really difficult to find that space to take a step back and to think about that longer term view or around that sort of brand loyalty element. What we've done as part of our agile marketing transformation is we have created some marketing pillars that focus on different parts of that marketing journey and different personas within our audience. And it's allowed us to create some space. Sort of the pillar that I look after is really focused on that year-round brand building and content engagement and really understanding the audiences better in order to create stuff that will give them value throughout the year. So we're building more of that engagement and more of those touch points. So when it comes to our events or it comes to sponsorship opportunities, they're already kind of engaged with us. They're already more primed to make that decision to buy a ticket or to book a stand or whatever that may be. So it's really about having that space to understand your audience and act on it and build out what it is that they want from you, essentially.
Yeah, so customer insight, data driven, all very important to allow you to do that. And then Dasha, what for you are the key elements of a strong community building strategy, and how can businesses ensure they're not just gathering audiences but actually creating a sense of belonging?
I think first and foremost, I think you need to, as a business, kind of step back and make sure that you have a clear purpose and shared values that you can then make sure run through your communication, because that's what communities are built around, like audience communities. They want to connect with a brand and feel they have kind of an aligned sense, aligned values and aligned sense of mission with a brand or with a company. I think making sure there's active participation, there's an active dialogue with your audience. It's not just one way, because ultimately that's what's going to keep your audience engaged. So thinking through kind of your strategy beyond that kind of first content point, that first touch point. What happens if you have some feedback from the audience? What are you going to do with that feedback? How are you going to respond beyond that? And then it's about consistency, right? Consistency of output. And as your audience gets used to certain, communication down certain channels, and as they start getting value from those pieces of communication, they're going to keep coming back. And if they're going to keep coming back, it's making sure you're consistently putting out that valuable communication for them, so that they know that they can rely on it.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think that bringing together that insight and really thinking through the personalization is going to be very important going forward. In fact, we've had a question come in, which it might be interesting to touch on, because I think that probably is where we'll see some of the impact. So the question that's come in from Alexis is, how do you see AI transforming audience acquisition and targeting strategies in the next few years? I don't know if either of you want to respond.
I can jump in initially. I hope at least, that it's going to make life easier. I think we spend a lot of time on sort of setup of campaigns, on mapping out sort of different strategies in reporting, especially. And I think that with the technology that we're getting, all of that should be massively streamlined. I think we're already seeing a lot of this tech start to come in on, for example, on channels like LinkedIn when it comes to targeting audiences for paid campaigns. I think we're seeing it with how we can bring in, as we've mentioned before, sort of more personalization in the way that we reach those audiences. And I think that that combined with ongoing improvements in how we report and those insights that we get will mean it will make the process easier, quicker, more accurate, but also we'll be able to test and iterate and optimize almost continuously because we'll be getting those insights, we'll be getting that feedback loop even more than we are already. So I think hopefully as well, it's going to make life easier and more efficient and more accurate. I think there'll be some really interesting advances very rapidly over the next few years.
Yeah,
and I
agree. Sorry.
Yeah, Dasha.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think what we're going to, if used in the right way, I think what's going to be interesting, what we'll see, it's almost, we'll be acquiring, audience acquisition will almost have acquiring less, smaller amounts of audience, percentage of the audience, but will be higher value. So AI will allow us to refine and be able to actually, know that the people we do acquire as our audience are actually truly engaged. So it's almost that kind of percentage of audience, kind of the empty numbers will fall away, because actually we'll be able to measure and understand kind of where the truly valuable audience is and kind of where we're not actually getting any value. So we're not really engaging that community. So we don't need to invest time or effort in that particular segment anymore.
I think that's such a good point, that will also help us give them more value as well, because we'll be so much more focused and streamlined.
Yeah, I think that's very important application around AI, of that personalization, continuing to build those more niche or micro audiences and allowing us to engage them better. I think the agentic AI as well is certainly in B2B, we will see that emerging this year, and how it will, as you say, Chelsea, help marketers hopefully to be more effective and efficient and engaging in what they do, take away some of the areas which are really time consuming but actually aren't necessarily adding lots of value. So as you say, reporting, if some of these agentic AI will be able to play a role in that, allow marketers to optimize faster, better, and engage those key audiences in the long term as well. So I think it's going to be exciting, and it'll be very interesting over this next few years. Okay, I guess to wrap up, really, I have a final question. If anyone else wants to ask anything, please do drop it on the Q&A. But in the meantime, if attendees take one action after today's session to improve their audience strategy, what would you recommend it to be? Chelsea, start with you.
I would say that I think one of the strongest things you can do in terms of understanding and growing the audience is really bring your sort of creative storytelling elements together with your data and with your analytics. I think that sometimes we almost put ourselves in boxes. I know I've done this before. You're kind of either like a very kind of creative person, or you're very analytical and numbers driven. But actually, I think they really go hand in hand. So you can do your brand building and your creative elements and really lean into that to make yourself stand out. But then your data is almost an extra layer of almost like internal storytelling. It's telling you what's working. It's telling you what your audience is interested in. It's telling you what to do more of or what to do less of. And I think when you can marry those two together, I think that's when you get a really clear picture of where your audience is and where to invest that time and focus and energy in your marketing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Dasha, your thoughts?
I think my final one, it's not about you, it's about them. So it's the audience centricity, and starting, start with their problem, start with their challenge, start with what they're interested in, and then see where you fit in that narrative for them. And that's gonna if you start there, you're gonna find a story that they can genuinely resonate with.
Yeah, it's great advice. I think from my point of view, it would obviously be take a good look at how you work in terms of your ways of working. Think about embracing agile marketing principles so that you are more audience centric, more data driven. You do take an experimentation based approach to your go to market, so that you can drive more audience through improving and optimizing what you're delivering. So I think, with those three things together, that's quite a powerful combo we've put together there. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of you for joining me on the panel today. I think it was a really interesting discussion. I hope that everyone's enjoyed this panel event. We will be sharing the recording so you can share it with your colleagues. We've shared the reframe cards, so please download your copy now. They're about to be gated. And we'll also be sharing a reading list after, which brings together some publishing, media and events relevant content for you to read, listen to or watch post this panel to continue your own learning. And we'd love to hear back from you as well if you have any great reading, listening or viewing that you could share. We will certainly share that back out to everyone. So yeah, that leaves me with final thank yous, and thank you very much to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.